Part 1. The House That Never Went Dark. The town of Black Hollow, Pennsylvania was the kind of place people only noticed when they had a reason to pass through it, and most tried not to. Folk said the fog there didn't just rise from the damp earth or the pine woods surrounding the valley. They said it came from things buried too long, and secrets that never should have been unearthed. By day, Black Hollow looked almost harmless. A quiet main road, a red brick church, a cemetery on the eastern edge of town, weathered homes with sagging porches and peeling paint. But at night, especially when the drizzle rolled in and the streetlights blurred behind the mist, the entire town seemed to shrink into itself, like it was waiting for something it did not want to see. At the far end of Willow Lane stood a two-story White House with chipped paint and a rose garden out front. No matter the season, those roses bloomed a deep, wet red, the kind of red that never looked natural. The house belonged to Dr. Ethan Cole. For years, Ethan had been respected in Black Hollow. He was quiet, polite, a little distant maybe, but dependable. The kind of man people trusted. The kind of man who never raised his voice and always looked you in the eye. But anyone who knew him well knew there was only one thing in his life that truly mattered. His wife, Emily Cole. Emily had a softness to her that made people lower their voices around her. Pale skin, light hair, a faint smile that never quite seemed meant for this world. Ethan loved her in that dangerous, all-consuming way that people mistake for devotion, right up until it becomes obsession. Then Emily got sick. It started late in the winter. Nothing dramatic at first. A fever, fatigue. Then came the coughing, the shortness of breath, the long stretches of delirium, and that slow, terrible fading people only recognize when it's already too late. Ethan took her everywhere. Specialists, hospitals, clinics outside the state. He spent money he didn't have and begged for treatments no one believed would work. None of it saved her. Emily died on a cold, rain-soaked afternoon under a sky so low and grey it felt like the clouds themselves were pressing down on the rooftops. The church bell rang. The town showed up. People brought casseroles, flowers, and quiet condolences. The funeral was quick. The casket was closed. The grave was filled. Everyone thought that would be the end of it. But that first night after the burial, the lights in Ethan's house stayed on until dawn. At first, people said it was grief. Of course it was. A man loses his wife, he can't sleep. Nothing strange about that. Except the lights stayed on the next night too. And the night after that. And then people began to hear things. Soft footsteps moving across the floorboards long after midnight. Chairs scraping gently across the dining room floor. The faint clink of silverware. Sometimes, if the wind was right and someone was foolish enough to linger by the front gate, they could hear Ethan talking. Not muttering to himself. Talking to someone. In a low, patient voice. Tender, intimate, as if he were speaking to a woman seated just inches away from him. The problem was, Ethan lived alone now. At least, he was supposed to. Everything changed on a rainy Thursday night when Mrs. Harper, the widow who lived across the street, woke to the sound of her cat clawing furiously at the window. Half asleep and irritated, she pulled back the curtain and looked across the road toward Ethan's house. Then she froze. Through the dining room window, lit by a warm yellow lamp, she saw Ethan seated at the table. There were 2 plates, 2 glasses, 2 sets of silverware. Ethan sat upright in a white shirt, his hair combed neatly, as if preparing for a proper dinner, and seated across from him was a woman. She wore a white dress. Her head was tilted slightly to one side. Her blonde hair fell over part of her face. She sat perfectly still, hands resting in her lap. Mrs. Harper knew that hair, that posture, that thin, pale frame. It was Emily. Or at least, something wearing Emily's shape. Mrs. Harper felt her hands begin to shake. Across the street, Ethan smiled gently and lifted a fork with a small bite of food on it. He extended it toward the motionless figure and said, in a voice soft enough to be loving and clear enough to be horrifying, "Emily, you need to eat." The woman did not move. But Ethan continued speaking as if she had answered him. Every so often, he nodded, smiled, listened. Mrs. Harper gasped and dropped the glass in her hand. It shattered on the floor. At the sound, Ethan slowly turned his head toward her house. Even from across the street, she had the sickening feeling that he was looking directly at her. After that night, nobody in Black Hollow talked about Ethan Cole as a grieving husband anymore. They started whispering about sickness, madness, possession, something unnatural living inside that house on Willow Lane. Then the smell began. At first, it came and went, a strange mix of old flowers, antiseptic, and something sweet gone rotten. But with every passing day, it got worse. Thick, heavy, sour and wet, like decay covered in perfume. And still, every night, the lights in Ethan's house stayed on. As if someone inside had never truly left. Part 2. The Woman in the Bedroom. Out of everyone who had known Ethan Cole, only one person was willing to step inside that house after Emily's funeral. His old college friend, Daniel Brooks. Daniel worked insurance investigations in the next county over, and unlike the people of Black Hollow, he didn't believe in ghost stories, curses, or small-town superstition. He thought grief made people strange, sure, but not supernatural. To him, the rumors about Ethan living with his dead wife sounded like exactly what happens when fear and gossip get bored in a dying town. So one stormy afternoon, Daniel drove out to Willow Lane to see for himself. The rose bushes out front were still blooming. The lawn was still trimmed. Nothing was overgrown. Nothing was abandoned. If anything, the place looked too carefully maintained, as though Ethan was fighting to keep time from moving forward one blade of grass at a time. Daniel knocked 3 times. Almost a full minute passed before the door opened. Ethan stood there looking thinner than before. His face had sharpened. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. But he was dressed neatly, shirt buttoned, sleeves clean, posture composed. What unsettled Daniel most wasn't Ethan's exhaustion. It was his calm. He did not look broken. He looked protective. "Daniel," Ethan said softly, "you came." "I just wanted to check on you," Daniel replied. "Make sure you're okay." A faint smile touched Ethan's mouth. "I'm fine," he said. "Emily is too." Daniel paused. Then Ethan stepped aside and let him in. Inside, the house was dim. Thick curtains blocked most of the daylight. The air was dense with perfume, candle wax, disinfectant, and beneath it all, something old and spoiled that no amount of sweetness could fully hide. The living room was spotless. Polished floors. Fresh roses in a vase. Not a speck of dust anywhere. It was as if the house had been staged, not for guests, but for memory. "Where's Emily?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice steady. Ethan looked upstairs. "She's resting." That answer sent a chill down Daniel's spine. Ethan led him up the staircase, each step creaking under their weight. The higher they climbed, the stronger the perfume became. At the end of the hall, Ethan stopped in front of the master bedroom door and rested his hand on the knob for a moment, almost reverently. Then he opened it. Daniel stopped breathing. Emily lay in the bed beneath a cream-colored blanket, her hands folded over her stomach. She wore a white nightgown. Her blonde hair had been brushed smooth. Her lips were tinted pink. Her eyes were closed. At first glance, She looked like a woman in an unnaturally deep sleep. But the room around her gave the truth away. Perfume bottles, cosmetics, cloths, thin wrapping strips, a vanity crowded with brushes and powders, candles burning in all four corners of the room, casting a golden light that made everything look warmer than it should have, and far more grotesque. Daniel stepped closer. Then he saw it. Emily's skin had a sheen to it. Not sweat. Not life. Wax. Her face had been preserved, enhanced, maintained. Her cheeks were slightly hollowed. A ribbon had been tied loosely around her throat, and beneath it Daniel caught a glimpse of skin darker than the rest. "Ethan," Daniel said carefully. "She's gone." Ethan turned so fast the movement startled him. "Don't say that. You need to let her go. She never left." His voice had changed, not louder, but colder, more dangerous. "She talks to me every night," Ethan whispered. "She hears me. She knows I'm here. Her body is weak, that's all." Daniel felt his pulse rise in his throat. He looked again at Emily. The room was silent except for rain tapping the windows and the soft hiss of candle flame. Then he saw her hand move. It was slight. A twitch. Tiny, but unmistakable. Daniel stumbled backwards so fast he nearly hit the chair behind him. Ethan smiled. "See," he said. And in that smile, there was no madness. Not the wild kind, anyway. No ranting. No chaos. Just the terrifying certainty of a man who believed with all his heart that he was right. Daniel left soon after, but not fast enough. Because what truly destroyed him did not happen inside Ethan's house. It happened later that night. At exactly 2:17 a.m., Daniel woke with the sickening certainty that someone was standing in the corner of his bedroom. At the foot of the bed, pale against the darkness, was the silhouette of a woman in white. Her head leaned slightly to one side. Her blonde hair fell across her face. Daniel knew immediately who it was. Emily. She stood perfectly still, and when she finally spoke, her voice sounded dry, brittle, like a force through something that had already begun to rot. "He won't let me go." Part 3. The Empty Coffins. The next morning, Daniel Brooks walked into the Black Hollow Sheriff Station looking like a man who had already seen too much. His skin was drained of color. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. Whatever skepticism he had left had been wrung out of him sometime before dawn. At first, the deputy on desk duty assumed Daniel was there to report a break-in or some drunken disturbance. But as soon as Daniel described what he had seen in Ethan Cole's bedroom, and what he had heard in his own house later that night, the entire mood inside the station changed. Because for the past 2 weeks, strange things had already been happening at Red Creek Cemetery. Fresh soil had been found disturbed on several graves. Flowers left at the headstones were trampled or missing. A groundskeeper had twice reported hearing movement near the older burial section after midnight. And on 2 separate mornings, small engraved name plates had vanished from children's graves. Sheriff Howard Mason decided he had heard enough. By mid-afternoon, he and 2 deputies were standing on the porch of Ethan Cole's house with an emergency search warrant. When Ethan opened the door, he didn't look surprised. If anything, he looked relieved. He stepped aside without protest, said nothing, didn't ask what they were looking for. While the deputies searched the first floor and the upstairs rooms, Ethan sat in the living room with his hands folded in his lap, staring at his wedding portrait like he was waiting for an appointment. It was Howard who found the storage room behind the kitchen. The air inside was colder than the rest of the house. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with candles, perfume, wire, cloth, antiseptic, unlabeled bottles, and plastic containers full of substances no one wanted to identify on sight. There were gloves. preserving agents, makeup kits, medical tools. In the corner sat a metal trash bin with the lid half open. Inside were stained strips of fabric, clumps of hair, what looked like bits of broken fingernail, and several teeth. One of the deputies backed away immediately. But the worst discovery came from beneath the floor. A rug was pulled aside. Underneath was a square wooden hatch fitted with a heavy iron ring. It had been sealed so tightly no one would have found it by chance. When they pried it open, a wave of cold, wet air rolled up from below, carrying the smell of mildew, perfume, and something sweet and foul enough to turn the stomach. Howard shined his flashlight down. Then he stopped dead. It wasn't a storage crawlspace. It was a burial room. A narrow chamber had been dug beneath the house and reinforced with old brick and timber. Along the walls were makeshift platforms, old medical stretchers, tables, boards supported by cinder blocks. And on them lay bodies. Not one. Not two. 4. Emily was there. And so were 3 others. Each one had been arranged with the same sickening care. Hair brushed, skin cleaned and treated, lips colored, hands folded neatly over the torso. Small tags had been tied around their wrists with names written in black ink. 2 of those names matched graves at Red Creek Cemetery. The third belonged to a young woman who had been reported missing in a neighboring county nearly a year earlier. One of the deputies turned and vomited before he could stop himself. Howard climbed back up and stared at Ethan. "What did you do to them?" Ethan slowly raised his eyes. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't defensive. He looked almost wounded that they would ask. "They're not dead," he said quietly. "You buried them too early." No one moved. Ethan's voice remained calm, too calm. When the heart stops, that doesn't mean the soul is gone. Not right away. Some of them are still there, still hearing, still feeling, still afraid. Howard stepped closer. "You dug them up." "I brought them back somewhere safe." "You stole corpses from a cemetery." "No," Ethan said, finally looking angry. "I kept them from being abandoned." The house seemed to tighten around them. Rain struck the windows in hard little bursts. Somewhere upstairs, one floorboard creaked though no one was there. Howard had interviewed killers, liars, addicts, grieving husbands, and men driven off the edge by things they could not survive. But the expression on Ethan's face unsettled him in a way none of them ever had. Because Ethan believed every word he was saying. This wasn't madness in the way people imagine it. It was faith. By nightfall, the sheriff's department had moved out to Red Creek Cemetery with floodlights and shovels. Grave after grave was opened. 3 coffins were empty. A 4th contained only shreds of burial fabric and hair. The soil beneath those plots showed signs of being disturbed more than once, over a period of months, which meant Ethan had not acted in a single burst of insanity. He had been doing this for a long time. When they finally led him back to the patrol car in handcuffs, Ethan stopped in the yard and lifted his face toward the rain. He smiled. A small, exhausted smile. Then he said, almost to himself, "You think I'm the one who brought them back?" Howard shoved him toward the car. "Get in." But Ethan kept speaking, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the street. "No," he whispered. "I just learned how to keep the door open." That night, nobody in Black Hollow slept easy. Doors were double locked. Curtains were shut tight. Porch lights stayed on until morning. Because now the town understood something far worse than grave robbery had happened on Willow Lane. Ethan Cole had not merely refused to bury the dead. He believed he had trapped them somewhere between leaving and staying. And the truly horrifying thing was, he might have been telling the truth. Part 4. The Basement That Breathed. After Ethan Cole was taken into custody and transferred to the county detention center, the house on Willow Lane was sealed off. Black Hollow tried to breathe again. People told themselves the nightmare had been contained. Ethan was gone. The bodies had been removed. Whatever evil had taken root in that house would dry up without him there to feed it. But for the next 3 months, the town only got worse. It started with power failures. Short ones at first, just enough to flicker lights and shut off televisions in the houses closest to Willow Lane. Then came the noises. Neighbors reported hearing movement inside the sealed house at night. Footsteps overhead. Furniture scraping. Slow, rhythmic tapping from inside the walls. 2 teenage boys who hopped the fence one Saturday evening ran back out pale and gagging, swearing they had heard a woman singing from under the kitchen floor. The town council finally gave in to public pressure and approved the house for demolition. A 4-man crew was brought in from out of town. Men used to rotten beams, asbestos, mold, and abandoned structures. Men who laughed at ghost stories. That laughter disappeared within the first hour. The morning they entered the house, the sky sat low and grey over Black Hollow. Sheriff Howard Mason was there with 2 deputies to supervise. The workers spread out through the house, stripping drywall, inspecting joists, making notes. Then a man named Mark Hensley suddenly held up a hand. Everybody shut up. No one spoke. At first, there was only the sound of wind pressing against the windows. Then they heard it. A soft, slow sound coming from beneath the kitchen floor. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Mark knelt and pressed his ear to the boards. A second later he jolted back to his feet. There's something down there. Howard stepped in, motioned the others back, and listened for himself. The sound was unmistakable. Breathing. Not pipes. Not settling wood. Not air in the walls. Breathing. After several tense minutes of searching, one of the workers found a seam hidden beneath the kitchen tile. The boards had been carefully concealed below a second layer of flooring. When they pried it loose, they uncovered a hatch fitted tight into the subfloor with an iron handle darkened by age. The moment they pulled it open, cold air flooded upward. It smelled damp and sweet and rotten all at once. Flashlights cut down into the dark. Then nobody moved. This was no crawlspace. No forgotten cellar. It was a chamber. Larger than the one law enforcement had already found months earlier. Its walls were lined in old dark wood, almost like a hand-built mortuary hidden under the bones of the house. Iron hooks had been driven into the beams along both walls. And hanging from those hooks were people. Not laid out. Not buried. Hung upright. There were 6 of them. Their skin was pale and glossy, coated in a film that looked almost like wax. Their mouths had been sewn shut with fine black thread. Their hair had been combed back from their faces. Their arms hung limp at their sides, and support straps had been bound around wrists and ankles to hold their bodies in place. Underneath them sat shallow trays catching a slow drip of dark fluid. One of the workers backed into the wall and slid to the floor without making a sound. Howard swept the beam of his flashlight slowly from face to face. Then he saw it. The chest of the woman nearest the far wall rose and fell. Barely. But it moved. He snapped the light to another body. That chest moved too. Then another. And another. All 6 of them were breathing. Nobody spoke. The room had gone beyond silence. It felt packed with it, heavy and wet and pulsing with the weak, uneven respiration of the things hanging below. Then, very slowly, the head of the nearest body turned. Its neck made a dry cracking noise. one eye rolled toward the light. And after that, every other head turned too. All 6 of them. Together. Looking straight up toward the open hatch. Howard Mason had seen overdose victims, murder scenes, car wrecks, suicides, children dead in house fires. He had seen things that stayed with a man forever. But this was different. These were not corpses reanimated. These were not living patients. These were bodies held somewhere in between. Like puppets pinned at the threshold of death and forced to remain there long after nature should have claimed them. Then a sound came up from a chamber. At first it was just air, leaking through damaged throats. Then a wet clicking. Then words. A voice, maybe one voice, maybe several led together, dragged itself into shape from the dark below. Let us go. At that exact moment, every light in the house went out. Part 5. The door was never closed. The screaming started the second the kitchen dropped into darkness. Flashlights hit the floor. One of the workers slammed into the back door trying to get out. Another crawled halfway into the dining room before a deputy caught him and dragged him upright. Howard drew his service weapon by instinct, though he knew before his hand touched the grip that bullets meant nothing here. Whatever was in that chamber below the house was no longer something law enforcement had language for. The blackout lasted less than 10 seconds. When backup power from the patrol units outside kicked in, pale emergency lights spilled through the kitchen windows. Howard forced himself back to the open hatch and looked down. The 6 bodies were still there. Still hanging. Still breathing. But now their eyes were open. All the way open. Milky. Glassy. Fixed upward. On several faces, the wax-like coating had started to crack, splitting into thin lines across the cheeks and forehead. Beneath it, the skin was grey and damp, like meat kept too long in cold storage. One woman near the far end jerked her hand upward in a weak, broken motion, as if she were trying to reach for someone through deep water. Then came the sound. Not from one throat. From all of them. A grinding, airless strain of sound somewhere between a sob and a moan. Emergency medical teams and forensic specialists were called in before dawn. By the time they arrived, 2 of the hanging bodies had stopped moving completely. The other 4 were removed with extreme care and rushed to the county hospital under conditions no one involved would ever be able to describe without trembling. The official findings only made it worse. These were not preserved cadavers. They were not recently deceased. They were, in biological terms, alive, though barely in any way that should have been possible. Body temperature severely depressed. Cardiac activity faint but present. Neurological function fragmented, unstable, incomplete. It was as if each person had been suspended in the final instant before death and held there for weeks, maybe months. Meanwhile, investigators digging through the evidence recovered from Ethan's home found a series of locked journals hidden under the floorboards in Emily's old bedroom. What those journals contained terrified everyone who read them. Ethan had documented everything. Room temperature. Chemical treatments. Wax application intervals. Perfume concentrations. Muscle contraction. Pulse irregularities. Eye movement. And most disturbingly of all, entries labeled soul response events. Page after page describe his belief that death was not immediate, that when the heart stopped, the body did not become empty all at once. According to Ethan, the soul lingered. It hovered. It hesitated. And if the body was preserved correctly, if decay could be delayed, if enough structure remained intact, then whatever had not yet crossed over could be held in place. He called the process holding the door. But Ethan had not invented the idea. In the final journal, buried between anatomical sketches and preservation notes, Investigators found the same symbol repeated over and over again. A closed circle. Inside it, faceless figures standing hand in hand. Underneath the symbol, written again and again in a jagged hand, were the words, "The stillness keeps them near." That phrase led to buried local records, forgotten church documents, and scattered references more than a century old. Black Hollow had once been home to a secretive group. A cult, if you wanted to call it what it was. They believed death was not a passage to be accepted, it was a separation to be resisted. They believed the soul could be prevented from leaving. That a body, if properly prepared, could act as a vessel. A container. A holding place. They had a name. The Order of Stillness. When Howard questioned Ethan again, the man sat beneath the buzzing fluorescent light with his hands folded neatly on a metal table. He looked exhausted, yes, but also vindicated. "How many more are there?" Howard asked. Ethan smiled faintly. "I didn't start this." "Then who did?" "What's under this town has always been here." "Who chose the victims?" For the first time, something flickered in Ethan's face. Not guilt. Not fear. Recognition. "The town did," he whispered, "long before any of us were born." That same night, all of Black Hollow lost power. Not from a storm. Not from a transformer failure. At 12:57 a.m., the entire town went black. People woke to dogs howling. Church bells ringing by themselves. The sound of dirt shifting outside bedroom windows. At Red Creek Cemetery, the security cameras captured their final seconds of footage before the feed died. The older burial ground began to swell. Not metaphorically. Physically. The earth rose in small, heaving bulges as if something beneath it was pressing upward. One headstone tipped sideways. A crack opened in the soil. Then from that crack, a hand emerged. White. Thin. Human. At the county hospital, at that exact same moment, the 4 survivors from the chamber beneath Ethan's house opened their eyes. Every heart monitor in the ward began to scream. The nurse on duty later said none of them looked at her. All 4 stared upward toward the same corner of the ceiling, as if someone was standing there waiting for them. Then, together, they opened their mouths. Their throats were too damaged for speech, but somehow words still came out, broken, layered, warped, as though many voices were forcing themselves through only 4 ruined bodies. "He is not the only one." By morning, a fog thicker than anything Black Hollow had ever seen swallowed the town whole. From Willow Lane to Red Creek Cemetery, from the old church to the dirt road leading into the woods, visibility dropped to almost nothing. And through that white, suffocating mist, people began to see figures standing in the streets. They did not move. They did not speak. They simply stood there in silence, heads tilted slightly to one side, as if waiting for someone to call them back. The door Ethan had held open for so long had probably never been closed at all. And the worst part was, nobody in Black Hollow knew what was coming through it now. If you want, I can turn this into a fully polished American YouTube horror script with a cold open, narrator transitions, suspense pacing, cliffhanger endings for each part, and a final call to action.